Most people believe obsession is something rare, extreme, or reserved for unstable individuals. But what if I told you that in the next 15 seconds, your brain is going to show you a person, a memory, a desire, a regret, or a fantasy you repeatedly return to without realizing it has a psychological grip on you? And what if I told you that the very act of constantly thinking about that one thing is not accidental, not romantic, not fate, but a carefully conditioned mental loop that was built inside your mind, one small moment at a time, without you ever giving it permission to exist? Obsession does not begin as madness, and it does not arrive in loud, dramatic waves the way movies and novels like to show it, because real obsession begins quietly, almost invisibly, as a repeated thought that feels harmless at first, then slowly becomes familiar, then comforting, then necessary, and eventually it becomes the center of gravity around which your moods, your focus, your energy, and your decisions begin to orbit. It can start with a person, an idea, a goal, a fear, a memory, or even an imagined future. But what truly fuels obsession is not the object itself, but the emotional charge your brain attaches to that object, turning it into a source of dopamine, hope, meaning, anxiety, or escape. At its core, obsession is a survival strategy that has gone out of balance, because the human brain is wired to lock onto whatever it believes is essential for survival or happiness. And in ancient times, that focus may have been on food, safety, shelter, social belonging, and protection from danger. In the modern world, however, the brain does not distinguish between physical survival and emotional survival, so it can become just as fixated on a text message, a social media profile, an ex-partner, a certain body image, a level of success, or a deeply personal insecurity, and it will pursue it with the same intensity as if your life depended on it. You might think you are choosing to think about that person or that thing, but the uncomfortable truth is that repetition is usually not a choice, but a conditioning process. Because every time you revisit a thought, your brain strengthens the neural pathway connected to it, making it more automatic, more accessible, and more demanding of your attention the next time around. In this way, obsession is not created in a single dramatic moment, but built slowly through repeated emotional reinforcement, like a path in a forest that becomes more visible the more often it is walked on. One of the most powerful ingredients in the formation of obsession is uncertainty, because the human brain is deeply disturbed by things it cannot fully understand or control, and so it keeps returning to unclear situations, unresolved conversations, unanswered questions, and inconsistent treatment in an endless attempt to create closure. This is why people often become more obsessed with those who give them mixed signals than with those who are consistently kind and present, because the mind becomes addicted to the emotional puzzle, constantly trying to decode it, solve it, and finally feel at peace. But in most cases, that peace never arrives, so the loop continues. Another key factor in the psychology of obsession is the role of dopamine, a chemical in the brain that is released not just when you get what you want, but when you anticipate getting it, which means that the wanting itself becomes more powerful than the having. This is why you can obsess over someone who treats you poorly, who does not commit, who disappears, or who stays just out of reach, because every small sign of attention, every message, every glance, every compliment becomes a tiny reward, and your brain clings to the anticipation of the next reward more than to the reality of how you are actually being treated. Over time, your thoughts begin to revolve around this source of emotional stimulation, and your day is shaped by it more than you realize, because you check your phone to see if they have replied. You replay conversations in your head. You imagine future scenarios. You analyze their behavior, and you rearrange your schedule, your energy, and your mood around their presence or absence. This is the moment where obsession has already taken root, even though you might still call it attraction, interest, curiosity, or love, because obsession rarely wears a scary label at the beginning, and it is only later, when the emotional damage is already done, that you begin to recognize how deeply you were entangled. Obsession can also grow from pain, especially unresolved pain that never had a chance to heal correctly, because when something hurts deeply, the brain marks the source of that pain as important, and that importance can easily transform into fixation. This is why people often become obsessed with those who rejected them, betrayed them, left them confused, or made them feel unworthy, because the mind keeps circling around the wound, trying to understand it, fix it, or rewrite the ending, not realizing that the obsession is actually preventing healing rather than creating it. What makes obsession particularly dangerous is that it often disguises itself as deep connection, intense passion, or powerful destiny. And these labels make it feel meaningful instead of unhealthy. You might say, "I've never felt this way about anyone before," or "No one else makes me feel like this," without realizing that what you are really describing is a self-created chemical and psychological storm inside your own mind, not necessarily a special or balanced bond with someone else. The brain also strengthens obsession by creating a fantasy version of the object, one that is more perfect, more understanding, more compatible, and more significant than reality. And you gradually begin to fall in love, not with the real person or real outcome, but with the story you have been telling yourself about it. This imagined scenario becomes more powerful than anything real could compete with, and any evidence that contradicts the fantasy is ignored, minimized, or explained away. Because accepting reality would mean facing loss, disappointment, and emptiness. And the mind would rather stay trapped in illusion than experience that pain. Repeated imagination is just as powerful to the brain as real experience, because it triggers similar neural patterns. And this means that every time you imagine being with them, talking to them, proving something to them, or finally being chosen by them, your brain strengthens the illusion that it is real, and the emotional attachment deepens even further. This is how obsession can continue growing, even in complete silence, without any real interaction, which is why some of the strongest obsessions exist entirely in the mind of the person experiencing them. Your environment, your past, your childhood, and your attachment patterns also silently shape what you become obsessed with. Because if you grew up around emotional inconsistency, you may confuse chaos with excitement, distance with mystery, and emotional unavailability with challenge. And your brain will chase those feelings because they feel familiar, even if they are painful. In this way, obsession is often a repetition of old emotional patterns, not a new or unique experience. But it feels new because the character has changed, even though the script is the same. What is perhaps most unsettling about obsession is that it can feel like purpose, like motivation, like passion, like direction, and in a strange way, it can give life a sense of meaning, because it gives the mind something to focus on, something to chase, something to analyze, something to dream about. This is why letting go of an obsession can feel like losing a part of your identity, because for a long time, it was the thing that gave your days intensity, and without it, everything can feel empty, quiet, and unfamiliar, which makes the mind want to return to it, even if it was destroying you. At this stage, obsession has usually moved beyond a simple thought or attraction, and has begun to rewire the brain itself, because the brain adapts to what you repeatedly feed it. And if you feed it a single emotional theme over and over again, it will organize itself around that theme. This means that your perception, your focus, your memory, and even your body's stress response begin to align with the object of your obsession. And without realizing it, you are no longer just thinking about it. You are living inside it. The most shocking part is that many people live their entire lives inside some form of obsession without ever calling it by its true name, because it can be directed towards success, power, validation, perfection, beauty, revenge, spirituality, or control. And society often praises these versions of obsession, calling them ambition, dedication, or discipline. The line between healthy focus and destructive fixation becomes blurred, and the person trapped inside the obsession is often the last to realize how narrow their world has become. And just as your brain learned to obsess, it can also learn to release, to detach, to reprogram, and to redirect its focus. But that process begins with understanding the invisible mechanism that formed the obsession in the first place. And once you see it clearly, once you recognize that it is not destiny, not magic, not fate, but a pattern built by your brain, you have already taken the first step toward breaking its power, even if that power still feels overwhelming right now. The way obsession deepens over time is not accidental, because the brain begins to weave it into the structure of your daily routine, attaching it to moments that were once neutral, so that waking up, checking your phone, passing familiar places, listening to certain songs, or seeing specific images all become quiet triggers that pull your mind back toward the center of its fixation. Each of these small moments strengthens the mental association, and the brain, driven by pattern recognition, starts to believe that the object of your obsession is connected to everything, which gives it an even greater emotional importance than it actually deserves. As the obsession grows, it does not remain limited to conscious thought, because it begins to influence your subconscious expectations, shaping your intuition, your dreams, and your instinctive reactions in ways that you rarely notice logically, but feel very deeply. You may find yourself feeling anxious for no obvious reason, only to realize later that your anxiety is linked to an imagined scenario involving the object of your obsession. And in this way, the mind continues the cycle even when you are not actively thinking about it, which makes escape feel almost impossible. Your brain slowly reorganizes its priorities based on what it believes matters most. And because obsession is fed with strong emotion, repeated attention, and imagined meaning, it rises to the top of your internal hierarchy. This means that other things that once mattered, such as hobbies, friendships, personal goals, health, rest, and creativity, begin to fade into the background, not because you no longer care about them, but because your mind keeps pulling your focus away and placing it back onto the one thing that has taken center stage. The danger of this shift is that it feels natural, like your life is simply evolving or reorganizing itself, when in reality, it is narrowing and restricting itself to fit inside a much smaller emotional space. You may even start to measure time differently, counting the hours by when you will see them, hear from them, think of them, or finally escape their hold. And this distorted relationship with time warps your sense of the present moment, keeping you mentally trapped in either anticipation or regret, instead of allowing you to exist fully in what is actually happening. A powerful contributor to this process is imagination, because the brain prefers imagination to uncertainty, and obsession thrives in the gap between what is known and what is desired. When something is unclear, ambiguous, or incomplete, your mind tries to finish the story, and this mental storytelling becomes emotionally engaging, Because you are not just imagining what is likely, you are imagining what you long for, what you fear, or what you hope for most. Those imagined scenarios become more attractive, intense, and meaningful than reality itself. So the obsession strengthens not because of what actually happens, but because of what you repeatedly rehearse in your mind. The more you imagine connection, understanding, resolution, or victory, the more your brain believes that these outcomes are real, and it begins to crave them the same way it would crave real experiences. This is why people can become deeply attached to someone they barely know, or to an outcome that has not happened, or to a future that only exists in thought. Because repetition gives imagination emotional weight and psychological reality. The body begins to react as if something is truly happening, and the emotional bond strengthens without the need for external proof. Another layer of obsession is created by emotional patterns formed early in life. Because the way you learn to connect, attach, and seek safety as a child often becomes the blueprint for what your brain searches for as an adult. If love was mixed with inconsistency, absence, unpredictability, or emotional intensity, then your mind may mistake emotional instability for passion, and it may interpret calm, safe, and steady connections as boring, uninteresting, or unfulfilling. In this way, obsession is not just about the present, but about the repetition of the past in a new form. Your mind then begins to search for emotional resolution in the present that it did not receive in the past. And the person or idea you are obsessed with becomes a symbolic stand-in for an old wound, an old lack, or an old longing. You are not only trying to win them, understand them, or reach them, you are also unconsciously trying to heal a part of yourself through them. And this makes the obsession feel even more important because it is tied to your identity, your history, and your sense of worth. At some point, the obsession can even become part of the way you define yourself, because you tell yourself stories like, "I am the one who cares the most," or "I am the one who understands them better than anyone," or "I am the only one who feels this deeply." And these narratives give you a sense of uniqueness and purpose. Letting go would not just mean losing them, it would mean losing the role you created for yourself in relation to them, and that creates fear, resistance, and emotional attachment, even when the connection itself is harmful. It is also important to understand that obsession is not always centered on another person, because it can just as easily be about a version of yourself that you want to become, a success you want to achieve, a mistake you cannot forgive, or an image you want to destroy or protect. In these cases, the fixation is internal instead of external, but the mechanism is the same, because the brain locks onto a single emotional theme and builds its world around it, judging everything else in relation to that one reference point. This is why some people become obsessed with perfection, working endlessly to eliminate perceived flaws, while others become obsessed with failure, constantly replaying mistakes and humiliations in their mind as if they are trying to punish themselves indefinitely. In both cases, the brain is caught in a loop that repeats emotion rather than seeking truth, and the repetition convinces the person that this loop is simply who they are, rather than a pattern that was learned and can be unlearned. Physiologically, obsession is also reinforced by the body, because heightened focus, emotional arousal, anticipation, and anxiety all activate the stress and reward systems in the brain, creating a powerful mixture of chemicals that can feel intense, meaningful, and addictive. This chemical cocktail makes the obsession feel real, urgent, and significant, even when logic tries to intervene, and the body begins to associate this emotional intensity with a sense of being alive, making normal, peaceful moments feel dull or meaningless by comparison. The mind then starts to chase intensity instead of truth, drama instead of stability, and stimulation instead of peace, because peace does not create the same chemical reaction. This is the moment when obsession truly becomes a trap, because even suffering can start to feel preferable to emptiness, and the brain chooses familiar pain over unfamiliar calm, simply because at least familiar pain feels like something. Despite how overwhelming all of this may sound, obsession is not a permanent state, and the same brain that created it through repetition can weaken it through redirection and awareness. Every time you become aware of a thought pattern, every time you interrupt a fantasy, every time you choose present reality instead of imagined scenarios, you are carving a new path in your mind. And although it may feel slow at first, this process quietly begins to weaken the old loop, even when it feels like nothing is changing. What most people do not realize is that the brain cannot simply stop obsessing, because it needs something to replace the fixation. And if that space is left empty, the mind will often return to the familiar loop automatically. This is why true release from obsession does not come from suppression or denial, but from conscious redirection toward new meanings, new goals, new connections, and a new version of self that is no longer built around the old emotional center. The moment you begin to see obsession as a pattern rather than as destiny, you regain an element of power that you did not know you had, because you are no longer a passive victim of your thoughts. You are an observer of them, and that small shift in perspective is the beginning of psychological freedom, even if the emotional attachment is still present. In the final section, you will learn exactly how the brain can be retrained, how the emotional grip of obsession can be loosened, and how a new, healthier focus can be established without destroying your sense of identity, your ability to feel deeply, or your capacity to care, but rather reshaping it into something that empowers instead of consumes you. Breaking the hold of obsession begins with awareness, because the first step in any psychological shift is to observe the patterns your mind has been following without judgment, noticing how often your thoughts return to the object of fixation, how emotions spike in response to imagined scenarios, and how your behaviors and decisions have been subtly, or not so subtly, shaped by this internal loop. And in that observation lies the seed of control that the obsession has been quietly denying you. The brain does not release obsession simply because you want it to go away, because obsession is reinforced by repetition, emotion, and chemical reward. And without a plan to redirect these same forces, the mind will keep returning to familiar fixation, which is why most attempts at forgetting or moving on fail, leaving you frustrated, defeated, and convinced that you are powerless over your own thoughts. When in reality, power is available if you understand the mechanics of how obsession forms. One method for loosening the grip is called cognitive restructuring, which involves consciously challenging the stories you tell yourself about the object of obsession, examining the evidence for and against your beliefs, and creating alternative, balanced interpretations that do not feed emotional overinvestment. Because the brain is always seeking patterns, and if you offer a new pattern consistently, it gradually becomes stronger than the old one. This is why people who journal, reflect, and analyze their thought patterns over time begin to experience relief, because they are literally reshaping the neural pathways that once kept them locked in repetitive thinking. Exposure also plays a paradoxical role, because avoidance of triggers often strengthens obsession, while controlled, mindful exposure allows the brain to experience the object without reacting automatically, which gradually reduces emotional intensity and uncouples the object from heightened reward signals. By approaching triggers with awareness rather than fear. You teach your mind that these stimuli are not dangerous, essential, or all-consuming. And over time, this diminishes the compulsive pull that has dominated your attention. Another critical element is substitution, because the brain needs stimulation, emotion, and engagement. And if those drives are left unaddressed, obsession will return, finding another point of fixation. Redirecting your energy toward meaningful goals, creative outlets, skill development, or social connection provides a new source of emotional reward, one that is healthy, constructive, and reinforcing. And this gradually retrains the brain to release chemical dependence on the old obsession while still feeling alive, motivated, and engaged. Mindfulness and meditation are especially effective because they teach the brain to observe thoughts without reacting to them, creating a space between stimulus and response, between desire and action, and between fixation and identity. When you realize that a thought about the object of obsession is just a thought, fleeting, impermanent, and separate from who you are, you weaken the automatic power it has over your emotions, and the brain begins to rewire itself toward a calmer, more resilient baseline. Self-compassion also plays a crucial role, because obsession is often accompanied by guilt, shame, or self-criticism, and these emotions fuel the very loop you are trying to escape. By treating yourself with understanding and patience, recognizing that your mind is doing what it was trained to do, and accepting that intense emotional attachment is a human experience rather than a personal failure, you reduce internal resistance, lower stress, and allow the brain to reorganize more effectively, making behavioral and emotional change more attainable. It is also vital to recognize the distinction between healthy passion and destructive obsession, because the brain can respond to both with intensity, but the difference lies in balance, choice, and impact. Healthy passion motivates, inspires, and energizes without eroding other aspects of life, while obsession consumes, narrows, and destabilizes. And learning to identify the subtle signs, emotional volatility, repetitive thought loops, impaired decision-making, and loss of perspective, allows you to intervene before patterns become entrenched. Gradually, the brain can learn to associate the object of obsession with neutrality instead of emotional elevation, because when repetition is paired with calm, measured attention rather than heightened arousal, the chemical reward system is no longer triggered in the same way, and the emotional pull begins to fade, often without dramatic effort. This is why interventions that seem counterintuitive, such as controlled exposure, reflection without reaction, and conscious non-engagement, are among the most effective tools for reducing obsession over time. Support systems are another crucial component, because the mind often becomes trapped in obsessive loops when it feels isolated, unheard, or misunderstood. And sharing thoughts, emotions, and experiences with trusted people provides perspective, validation, and accountability. Through conversation, observation, and reflection, facilitated by others, the brain is reminded that life is larger than the object of fixation, that your value is independent of this attachment, and that multiple pathways to fulfillment exist outside the narrow emotional loop. Finally, integrating meaning into life beyond the obsession is essential, because the mind craves purpose, focus, and emotional investment. And if these needs are redirected toward personal growth, relationships, creativity, contribution, or mastery, the old obsession loses its primacy. The brain begins to recognize alternative sources of reward, excitement, and engagement. And over time, the obsession that once dominated thought and emotion diminishes, not because it was forcibly eliminated, but because it was gradually replaced with something richer, more balanced, and deeply aligned with your true goals and identity. The transformation is rarely instant, because obsession is built over time through repetition, reinforcement, and emotional intensity. And it takes consistent, mindful effort to weaken the neural pathways that maintain it. But the process is cumulative. Each moment of awareness, each act of redirection, each choice to engage with reality instead of fantasy, compounds over time until the obsession is no longer a controlling force, and the mind begins to experience freedom and clarity. Even after the obsession diminishes, the lessons remain, because the brain now has experience observing, managing, and redirecting intense emotional attachments, which strengthens resilience, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence, making future fixations less likely to spiral out of control, and ensuring that deep passion, curiosity, or engagement can exist without tipping into destructive loops. Obsession is ultimately not about the object, the person, or the outcome, but about the structure your brain builds around emotionally charged stimuli. And when you understand the underlying mechanisms, repetition, emotional reinforcement, uncertainty, imagination, attachment patterns, and chemical reward, you gain the insight and tools to take control of your attention, your emotions, and your behavior, transforming what once felt uncontrollable into a conscious, deliberate, and empowering process. And with this understanding, you realize that obsession is not a curse, but a signal that your brain is capable of incredible focus, intensity, and emotional investment, and that the same mechanisms that created unhealthy fixation can be consciously redirected toward growth, connection, creativity, and mastery, turning the very power that once trapped you into the engine for your transformation. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful or eye-opening, make sure to hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more practical psychology insights, self-awareness tools, and mind-sharpening advice. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.